So we're here to talk about public safety, and it's actually going back longer than, as I think about this, about 2.5 years ago or so, I discussed with then Chief David Preventure the idea of the police departments doing a master plan of sorts that would guide the police department's efforts for the foreseeable future, for the next 10 or 20 years or so. And we in New Bedford are big on planning. I've been big on planning during my administration. And we have master plans or strategic plans all across city government, ranging from the port to the school department to the library to the zoo to you name it. We do it because what we've tried to cultivate here is the idea that we have to think long term, and you can't think long term unless you have unless you plan, unless you cultivate the habit of planning and acting on plans and following through. And because to my mind, that's something that hasn't been done nearly enough here historically. So too does it apply to the police department. Ordinarily, police departments undergo strategic plans when they're forced into it. And as you look around the country, there are plenty of examples of this, of police departments that undergo master planning processes when in response to scandals, whether they are excessive force scandals or some internal corruption scandals or something along those lines. That is the norm in America, and to my mind, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way, that we only plan, police departments plan when things get bad, when there's something that we have to address. We should be planning because we want our police department to be better than it was the day before, and that's the effort. And that's the effort across city government. We have committed to improving our game in whatever we do, whether it's in public safety, whether it's in the way we operate our libraries, the way we operate our port, our fire department, you name it. That's what we do. And so, you know, it seemed to me, and I had this conversation with Chief Preventure about it, that you know, we had an opportunity really to set the department in a general direction that would serve the needs of the residents in the long run, especially in a period when crime is down. I mean, we've passed out some, if you don't have them already, some FBI crime data. I mean, crime is down in New Bedford fairly significantly over the years, but all the reason more that we should be doing this, not in response to a spike in crime, but an opportunity really for us to assess together what we should be doing better so that we continue to keep a lid on crime in our city. So that was the predicate for undertaking a planning process. Unfortunately, we had the interceding event of Chief Preventure's untimely passing, and in the course of bringing on Chief Cordeiro, we held this effort at bay for obvious reasons. But then we launched, and I'll ask the Chief to come on up in a minute to talk about this. The idea is one of opportunity to give him in particular as the Chief a direction forward again to make our department go from good to great. And so we hired Kim Craven from Public Safety Strategies, Inc., who's here with us today, and who will be talking a little bit about the report that some of you, or all of you, have received by now. But again, the report speaks for itself, and I won't go into great detail, but the focus of the report is operational. You know, what are the things that the police department can be doing better on a day-to-day basis, whether it has to do with the collection and the assimilation and the analysis of data, whether it has to do with training, whether it has to do with equipment, whether it has to do with the overall layout and the structure of the organization. All these questions came up. This was a soup to nuts look at the department. And our charge to Kim was throw it all in there. You know, this is an exercise in identifying issues, and to the extent that that those issues are identified, in some cases they may be, what we're doing is exactly what we should be doing, and so affirmations count for something. Those are useful. What's particularly useful is the constructive criticism. Where are we going wrong, and how do we improve? And therein lies the opportunity, it seems to me. You know, for us at a time when the department is not dealing with scandal, it's not dealing with spikes in crime, and crime is actually going down, it puts us in a position to actually integrate these recommendations and make the very most of them so that we can set our department up and therefore our city up well in the long run. So, you know, by and large, and again, the report speaks for itself. You know, what you'll see is a number of detailed recommendations up and down the organization, and they represent both affirmations as well as needs for change. And so far as changes are needed, they are in the way of adjustments and tweaks and not complete overhaul, because our department is a good department. And what we need is just to make sure that we are thinking 5 and 10 years down the road to set ourselves up well. You've heard me say it before. You know, before I was mayor, I was an assistant United States attorney, and I worked with police departments and agencies at every level of law enforcement, and the New Bedford Police Department stood out as one that was exceptional. And we want the department to remain exceptional in the long run. And that's why we're doing this planning exercise. So I want to mention all that. There are lots of changes to be made, but the chief will talk a little bit about the group that he's formed to help implement the changes that the recommendations of the report. And it's not to say that, you know, you look at the report and it's, you know, you implement it, you know, by the letter. Implementation is a practical exercise. We want to make sure that that we're making the most of that we're really delving into the issues that have been identified, so that we can make sure that that not only are things implemented the right way, but also that there's buy-in from the rank and file as well. So we look forward to the work ahead on that. But I just again I want to emphasize that we really appreciate the work that you've done, Kim, and Chief, and the department as well. Hank Turgeon, the president of the Bedford Police Union, is here as well. We look forward to working with the union to make sure that all this is done to set everybody up for success in the long run. Some of the changes, of course, are subject to collective bargaining, and that's certainly something that we won't be going into today, but that's an ongoing discussion with the union. But with all that, I want to turn it over to the chief for a few remarks, and then we'll bring Kim up to go into a little more detail. Chief.
Thank you, man. Well, first and foremost, I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. That's just around the corner.
I forgot that, yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, just around the corner, and just a quick message out there for everyone to be safe and responsible. That aside, I thank the mayor for actually having the vision to want to put together and put some assets to study the department, to begin some strategic planning and discussions and look at what we have and what we need and where we need to go to get the department to the next level. So I appreciate that, man. Thank you. And as you said, it is an opportunity. I think when you read the report, you're going to find what I already know, and the mayor already talked a little bit about, and has many times. We have a great police department. We have incredible committed men and women that are doing a fabulous job out there. And I think the report's going to be indicative of that. But any organization, and police departments in particular, under the scrutiny that we're in every day, that wants to be relevant, wants to be progressive, and wants to be efficient, and wants to lead, has to continuously look at their practices, their policies, look at what we're doing right, what we can do better, and what we're not doing at all that we should be doing, or what we should be scrapping. And having a fresh set of eyes of experts, Kim Craven, when I met her and her team, she's got a team of people with a lot of experience in law enforcement, former chiefs. So when they come in here with that level of experience and get to look at your agency from a fresh set of eyes and give you that perspective, I think that is incredibly valuable. As the mayor also mentioned, there's a slew of recommendations in there. Some we've already been working on as we've been going along, and we've been putting into play. We're looking at all those recommendations and looking at the low-hanging fruit, if you will, and trying to put those into play as soon as possible. We intend and will be setting up several committees within the department to invite, obviously, the union leadership and members of the department to partake in how we begin to develop policies, procedures, and some of the other things that are in the report. Important to be inclusive. We hope to do that and transparent. There are things in there that you're also going to read that most departments nationally are utilizing as their template, the 21st century policing. There is key points in there that we'll be looking as well on how we can best integrate that into our police department, because a blueprint doesn't fit just any department. You need to customize that, and hence why we'll be looking for an input internally. Community policing has been and continues to be our focus here in New Bedford, and how we can maximize that philosophy through the 21st century policing, and some of the recommendations in the study, I think, will be significant how we proceed and have an incredible impact in the city and the community. There is various aspects that we're doing very, very well, and there's always room for improvement. I appreciate the study and Kim Craven's team pointing that out to us, so we can build on it and continue to challenge ourselves. This is an incredible opportunity to develop strategic plans over the next 5, 10, and plus years to set up the department to continue to grow and progress in our field, which will only make our community safer, build better relationships with the community and city government. It is a very important and incredible opportunity that's been given to us. I do not look to waste it. We're going to be very hasty and hit the floor running with it as fast as we can. When I first met Kim, I told her what I was looking to get out of this study was a blueprint that would give us some guidance that we could get out and roll out as fast as possible, not something that was going to be hanging out on a shelf gathering dust and we wouldn't be able to put it into place. So she gave us that, which I think it's a very good study, a very good start for us. It won't be the end all, because like anything else, like I said, you have to continuously look internally what you're doing right when you're not doing well, for us to be efficient, effective, and progressive. When we stop to change, we stop to progress, and we become extinct, and we don't become effective. And I think that's what this study does for us today. I'm excited about it. It's a great opportunity. Again, I can't emphasize how appreciative I am of the men and women of the police department and the great work that they're doing, and I think the report is indicative of that. But that being said, there's always room for improvement and for us to become more successful. So thank you. With that said, I'm going to invite Kim Craven up to speak a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mayor. It's a great opportunity that we have to discuss the report with you today. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the process here has been a very inclusive one, and the cooperation level very high between both the mayor's office and the police department to get us to that point. Just a little bit of background on how we conducted the study. The chief referenced the team that we have. So public safety strategies, we've been in existence since 1994. We've worked with over 350 different municipalities. Well, I've been the primary point of contact for the chief. We've had a team behind the scenes working on it, research associates, data analysts, mapping specialists, and the team that was here consisted of 3 former chiefs and 1 former assistant chief from a major West Coast city. One of the benefits that we have is that our team is not all from New England. They're from various parts of the country. We stay up with contemporary policing practices, attend lots of national organizations, and the fact that we are out there helping police organizations all the time gives us the benefit of seeing what is happening in other areas, what's working, what's not, and then we're able to give that information to our clients. I want to reiterate as well, oftentimes when these situation comes about that a department wants a study, it's because something has gone wrong. Nothing had gone wrong here. It's about progress, which I think is a great place for a police organization to be in. It's not often that police organizations think about strategic planning by nature of the work that's being done. It's often a reactionary type of organization. So this has been a forward-thinking process to embrace the best practices of what's going on, and as the chief mentioned, to look into how efforts can be strengthened to meet the 21st Century Policing Report. We did a series of interviews here. We did 3 different site visits, most of them about 5 days. We had other meetings along the way. The chief and the department responded to every request that we had for data, information, records, reports, anything that they could produce. We will talk a little bit about how that can be improved going forward with some technology changes. We interviewed multiple department members. We went on ride-alongs, every station, every shift. Afforded people the opportunity to speak with us. We spoke with many external stakeholders, community groups, business leaders, faith-based organizations, social service organizations, the hospitals, so we could get a really good perspective of where there could be improvements made or what might be some of the limiting factors. We gave you out some data sheets, and all of this information is in the report, but I think it's really important for folks to understand the progression of the sheets. So there's 2 charts in your report. One is about the calls, the incidences within the department. The other one is about the arrests. So you'll see when you look at the full report that calls, incidences are going up and that arrests are going up. That does not mean that crime is going up. Sometimes people look at that and say, oh no, there's something wrong, the numbers are going up. That's intentional. This chief requires a lot of proactive work of the officers. So within the CAD RMS system, the computer-aided dispatch and record management system, there's codes for officer-initiated activity. So more officers on the street taking advantage of grants for overtime initiatives, that is going to naturally put those numbers up. Please do not think that that is negative on the police department. It's just easy when you look at that to say, oh no, numbers are going up. That's problematic. What's really important is the sheets that were passed out to you with the FBI data. We are using the FBI data now as a framework. That's what the city is typically using. We will update as soon as the discrete numbers from the FBI reports are available. We're going to go ahead and update that for the chief. But if you look at what's been happening over the course of a 10-year period, you'll notice 2015 is missing the department records. I'm sure that there was an internal complication of some sort, technologically wise, that did not allow the posting of the 2015 data. That's why that gap is there. But you can see some key indicators around the rapes and the assaults, that those are going down. We have positive hopes for that, optimistic that that's going to continue to move in the right direction. The same goes for the burglaries. The crime indicators there show that the progressive police work, those numbers that are going up, is having the intended effect of impacting crime. There is one area, auto theft, so we're just a little more cautious about that one. The changes have not been as consistent and steady, so that's an area that the department can take a look at. What's most important of all those sheets, the numbers that are on there, you'll see that one is labeled the crime index. If you look back to 2016, so the higher the number, that means there's more crime in comparison to other communities across the country. The index was at 506, and now that's down to 378. So that shows that the numbers are going in the right direction. That's really positive steps for folks to think about. Now, when we talk about crime and we talk about perception of crime, one of the things that has changed that perception, quite honestly, is media and social media. A lot of times when we're interviewing community members, they have the perception that crime is higher. It's been a trend nationally that the more quality of life things become more observant to community members, such as homelessness or loitering or panhandling, some of the issues around mental health. People have the perception that overall crime is going up, and that's not actually the case. It's just some of where things are happening in a community. There's a lot of talk in media, social media, about gun violence, and that can skew someone's thought. So if you keep that all in perspective and look at the numbers that are happening here, you'll see that some positive things are happening. The other area of note in the report, we all know that the country has been hit with the opioid epidemic, and there's some numbers that are promising here. While there's still a lot of work to be done, not just here but everywhere on addressing opioids in our community. You can see that the overdose numbers have gone down by over 100. That's really positive. There's been a lot of great work happening here. Co-responder programs, the chief sending out teams of folks, his officers, member of the clergy, social service organization, to provide direct service and advocacy for folks that have mental health and substance use disorders. So I think that's really reflective in your numbers. Again, that's something that has to be continually tracked. Those numbers can fluctuate pretty easily due to substances that are out in the community, but the concerted effort here has really made a difference, and I think everyone should know, if you don't know already, that the chief in the department was recognized by the Police Assisted Addiction Recovery Initiative, which is now a national focus, but for the work that's going on here. So definitely some positives. So that's a little bit about the data, and that should really frame people's thoughts, because we are, by virtue of the fact that we brought a team in to look at what's happening, we're going to say some things could be improved in areas, and that's just natural when you bring an outside team. But there are some super positive initiatives that are happening. The creation of a progressive administration. The chief has really focused on best practices, science-based strategies, really wanting to know what's working in other areas. Whenever I would bring up a topic to the chief, he'd say, well, what's someone else doing? What else can be done? So that open-mindedness, I think, is really positive for the department and the community for sure. Focusing on contemporary policing strategies, not just basing what the department does on how it's always been doing it, but how do we push that needle further? How do we be more community-oriented and provide a higher level of service for the community, not being satisfied by the gains that have been made with the crime data that we discussed. Engaging with the community, the chief himself, to a person that we spoke to in the community, could point to where the chief was, what he was doing. We will talk a little bit. We'd love to see some more embracing of that throughout the organization. There's lots of strategies that can help with that. And one of the crucial things is, as we would talk about a topic or would explore it more, sometimes the chief was one step ahead of us and saying, okay, we're going to do that now. He didn't need to wait for a report to start acting on an idea that he thought was progressive and start implementing it for the betterment of the department and this community, which I think is terrific. And one of the key things that I think is it's a natural progression here is accountability and transparency. That makes the headlines in any community, and really embracing that as a cornerstone of policing here, I think, is a terrific step. Again, it's improving on things that were already in place. So the notion of what we're talking about with 21st century policing, there's 6 pillars. The first, building trust, having police legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing, crime prevention, the training and education, and then officer safety and wellness. So each one of those areas, we've given topical areas that give a framework for these committees to work on. We are not, and we don't expect the chief or the mayor to be top down and saying, this is exactly what you have to do. These are areas that have worked, topics that have worked, strategies that have worked in other communities, and now let's shape the nuances. We will continue to be available for the chief for those discussions, so that as they're moving through the process, the ad hoc committees that come up to reflect on those 6 pillars and the bullet points that we added under each one, they can talk a little bit more about the framework here and about the local nuances. And we don't expect every recommendation to happen, because some of these recommendations will take fiscal resources that will have to be thought of over time. For example, training and education. It's certainly a focus area, but right now the department only has about $18,000 a year for training. So there's the in-service training that's required of every officer, specialized training. So trying to gather some resources for that, again, just doesn't happen in a minute. So the short-term pieces that the chief has already addressed, things with accountability, whether it be with getting a backlog that he inherited of internal investigations taken care of. That was a big lift to close out a multitude of different reports that were not completed. So he tackled that, looking at ways to improve technologies and efficiencies, focusing on increasing the amount of cameras within the community as a crime-fighting tool, replacing the computers within the cruisers that the officers rely on for day-to-day, doing checks of uniforms and consistency. That's one of the things that we saw, is that there was a little bit of inconsistency in how some of the officers were dressed. So making sure that accountability goes down to the station level, for the captains to be looking at procedures. So all of those pieces move to improve culture within any organization with unification. We've also suggested to do an evidence audit. That was something that didn't happen when there was a transition after Chief Preventer had passed on. That's something that's typically done when a new chief's brought in. It's just good practice to have that done. Again, there would be cost to that to have an outside audit done. Looking in the future to do a continual cruiser replacement plan. There was more than half of the fleet had over 100,000 miles. So the integrity of the fleet is really important for officer safety. It's also a very big capital cost, but thinking for the future of a continual replacement plan, which I know that the chief embraces. I know that one of the things that was a little bit of a limiting factor was the extraction process of the data from the CAD RMS system. The department is using a product that's used by many agencies, but the chief has talked about the potential of replacing the CAD RMS. Again, that is a cost to that. We've given him some suggestions on some lower cost mapping tools that could be integrated with the current software that they have, that can be done at a reasonable cost to help with the predictive policing. The chief implemented a ComStat process. That's where data is collected from the past on calls for services and incidences and arrests, and compiled in a way that each of the captains from the different stations can look at that information. So that was a good first step. There are some tweaks that can be made with layout of data, how that data is presented and used, digested, not just for the police command staff and personnel themselves, but the community. We talked about implementing some transparency of information. So with the 21st century policing, making more information and data available to the public, whether it be the ComStat reports themselves, totals of internal investigations, not with names, but how many complaints were made by community members, what were the outcomes, and that is just happening across the country when it comes to accountability. We talked about the increase in training budget and the grants. So the department is very proactive with its grants. The chief is seeking any grant that he possibly can to help with either the career development of the officers or services to the community. So he embraces and is moving in a progressive manner on that. The other area that we had identified as an issue, but that the chief was working on, was consistency of training for the supervisors. So there was a collaborative made between the chief and the community college to have a core curriculum designed. So that's an improvement. Again, he wasn't going to wait for our report to be finalized to continue his work in that area, so that occurred. A key area that we think would help with record keeping is that of the timesheet capture. So that there's better software and technology in place for tracking of officers when they work, maybe when they get called out onto specialized assignment. It also can track details and overtime so that if there's a amount of hours set for safety reasons for officers to be working, there's software out there now that can trigger that, make it easier for tracking, can assign budgets in a different way than some of the programs that have been available in the past. So that's certainly a positive. Sure thing. The other area that we think is important for the department is to take a look at facilities, modernization of facilities and where that can go in the future. That's certainly a long-term strategy to go ahead and take a look at that. There were some other changes that we had been recommending and talking about with the chief as we went on. There was a lot of complaints about the time it took on dog complaints, dog calls, barking dogs. So there was an increase in that staff as we were going through that. The record keeping itself, whether it be training or how grants are used, are all in sort of discrete databases. The training is in a way that is hard for anyone to analyze on an ongoing basis. So even though the training budget is low, there are free, no-cost, low-cost trainings. And for career development purposes, there's some tweaks that can be made there on how that database is maintained so that better tracking can occur. And one of the big things that we had suggested was a change in the operational structure of the organization, moving again towards some strategies that other agencies have embraced, and that's with having the chief be able to pick a chief of staff of his choice. We would suggest that to be a civilian position to oversee some areas such as communication and crime analysis, and really be a go-to person for the chief that, again, is of his choosing, not someone that is through civil service. We also suggest that there be research into regional dispatch. There's been some progress there with just internal consolidation of dispatch function here in New Bedford. The state 911 is very appreciative of regionalization. It's happening across our state, and from a best practices standpoint, across the country, regionalization is certainly something that is very efficient and effective in terms of making sure that it's professional dispatchers and call takers. There's no need for sworn personnel. Obviously, there's some bargaining issues that have to happen when that occurs. And he's also been changing some of the other positions that can be civilianized, such as management information system. In this day and age, with the complexity of police software technology and the change of pace, it's just not best practice to have someone in a sworn capacity overseeing something that is really a professional field now. So that change has occurred. So again, a lot of the tweaks that we're recommending have been happening in flight and as things progress. And I think that with the use of the subcommittees and having a lot of broad-based input, I think that the department will continue to see success. And while it's doing a great service already to the community, you're seeing good reductions in your crime. As the chief mentioned, there's always things that can change. And just the fact that there's a concerted effort to continually focus on the future for the betterment of the people that live, work, or travel here in New Bedford, I think is very complimentary to the work that's being done out of the mayor's office and the chief. I compliment them and the members of the department that are really working hard to deliver the best service possible for the community here. So that in a nutshell is what's in that report. We've been working here for, we started our interviews in August of last year, and have been writing the report detailing the information for the past few months. Certainly there'll be calls that continue, as I mentioned, between the chief and I, and we're going to help update the data as that becomes available. And we had requested some tweaks to how the CAD data was being kept in terms of switching of the crime types, between the call type and the disposition. The chief has been implementing some of those changes. So a year after that occurs, we're going to go ahead and look at the call loading time for the different calls. So we'll continue to be a resource in that area as well. So that is,
So
again, the
there.
high level.
You guys have all that? I'm sure you have questions. Once you fire away.
How much did the report cost?
$80,000. And it reminds me, I do want to thank the city council for providing the funding for, that we requested for this exercise.
Mayor, Mr. Craig talked about a lot of things in the report that are going to cost money, whether it's the fleet that needs a lot of work, or the more training, or facilities, or updated software, record-keeping systems. Is the money there to do a lot of this work?
Yeah, I think so. Well, let me just say this. So, the goal here, Brian, was to flag what's needed. The extent of the implementation obviously does have to meet up with, among other things, fiscal realities. But we're serious about this. We didn't go through an $80,000 exercise just to have it sit on the shelf, particularly when it wasn't prompted by anything, right? We want these things to happen, and so. We're already looking at ways of bolstering the fleet, for instance, which would be one of the bigger cost items, and we have some ideas about how we would do that. A lot of the other stuff isn't all that expensive until you get into questions about facilities, and that big capital costs like that get expensive. But things like software and other things are, I think, within reach.
One of the other benefits of having a study completed and the strategic plan done is now the problem statements and the focus for where the community wants to go is captured, which will make it easier for the department to attract some of the federal funding as well. Typically, when we help with a strategic plan, it's much easier for the agency to go after some of the bigger federal grants because that research is already done, puts them in a good position. They don't just have 4 weeks to respond to an RFP. There's also a new initiative through the International Association of Chiefs of Police that now the chief and his command staff can take a look at some of the recommendations, and there's some technical assistance that he can request there for free. So this is opening doors for the future, which I think is really important.
Chief, one of the things in the report is it mentions the community policing and your emphasis on that and how you're big on that, but it also seems to indicate that that message hasn't necessarily trickled down to a good amount of the staff. There are some internal communication issues with that and some other things. What's your response to that?
So this effort, I think I'd mentioned this at another press conference talking about community policing. In the mid-'90s, when we went to the community policing philosophy, we developed a unit to do it and never really infiltrated the entire department. So my emphasis has been for the last 2.5 years to make that emphasis, that philosophy to run throughout the department in its entirety. So it takes time to change culture and to get everyone to adapt into that philosophy. I am very proud of where we are today as a department moving towards that. More and more of our officers in the command staff and on the front lines are adopting that philosophy. It's going to take time to have a full department-wide adaptation of that philosophy into the fact that it's operational every day, using that philosophy on how they operate and integrate with the public every day.
Craig, if you could, I don't know how much you get into this, but what was your assessment or kind of the feedback you got of how the department is viewed by residents and taxpayers outside the department, and kind of what the perception is and how they treat people in the community and how they respond to people in the community?
Positive. Yeah, this community really embraced the police department. If anything, they want more time with them at community events. They feel that the chief is extremely approachable and involved, and even when there's difficult things that have gone in the community, that the police department is getting out front and trying to see how they could solve the problem, not sitting back. And about the community policing piece, we expect that to be a several-year changeover. If you think of the changing culture of policing, it's natural. So back in the day, if you will, New Bedford was very involved in what's called the New England Community Police Crime Prevention Partnership, and it was a unit, and every time we went to a community meeting or talked to someone, they talked about a lieutenant who I knew personally from NECP squared, but because it was a unit, as soon as there's budget impacts to municipalities, like we all saw in 2008, 2009, 2010, it's natural for those units to be taken out to focus on the core mission. So in order to rebuild that, it takes some time. And if you also think of 9/11, that had an impact on communities and community policing. Our federal funding and our focus changed. So all of those pieces have been impacting the transition back to that and making it be broad-based through the community. So expect that, to take some time. And it's not that folks won't do it. It takes time to do training, to set up programs, to allow officers the time, and that's where some of the grants, such as the JAG grant, which is a federal grant that the department can use for funding, that can help with some initiatives as well. So the more of those kind of building block and pieces that occur, the easier it will be to have that culture go through the organization.
One more, I know the mayor mentioned a lot of times when departments have reviews done, it's because something went awfully wrong, whether it was something, a shooting, race relations, or something like that. So you don't see any tinderbox or anything that could be a potential problem, whether it be community relations or any major issues.
No, we actually, when we start our studies, we always tell the clients if we find anything that's of a critical issue, we're going to bring it to the forefront right away. And there was no discussion of use of force issues here or disrespectful interactions. There will always be differencing of opinion on policing, but by and large, very positive considering what's happening in the national climate.
It's worth noting, too, on your question, Brian, that the last time an exercise like this was done in New Bedford, it was in response to a problem. The so-called Bratton report, which the chief and the deputy chief and President Turgeon would remember, was done in response to an incident referred to as the Morris Pena case, in which there were allegations of excessive force. The case ended up as a civil rights matter in federal court thereafter. It was a big to-do. There aren't things like that going on nowadays. I felt very strongly that we should be doing the same kind of planning we do all throughout city government in our police department, and that we have an opportunity, because there is an absence of crisis, to embrace it and implement it in a way that works for everybody.
So, Chief, it also brought up body cameras. Any thoughts on body cameras, or if that's the direction you want to go in, or has there been a resistance to do that?
So when you read the report, you'll see that's mentioned in there, and I think it's time that we let these kinks work out through the legal system and let other communities to work that out, because there's a lot of legal issues that'll come up then. There's also contractual issues for us that we'd have to tend to, but it makes sense for us as a community where we don't have these contradictive relationships with the community, that we have a really good relationship, that we have time that we don't have to rush into that. Let other departments work out all those legal issues that are going to inevitably come up with new technology and the operation of them in policing. It's starting to work itself out, but it's going to take probably a few more years before we see that stabilize, I think, especially here in Massachusetts. Other parts of the country have moved a lot quicker.
Mike, did you have something?
Yeah, the report talked about low morale and how there's an us versus them type of mentality, whether it's between you or even John, if you want to chime into us against them, including the administration. How do you go about solving something like that? And of course, it did mention too that it starts from the top, but it can't also just be the top. It has to be bottom up too.
Sure, absolutely. I'll gladly address that. As we mentioned earlier, changing a culture takes time. Now, I've been here for 32 years, and there's been a morale issue for my whole entire 32 years here. Some higher, some lower, right? So it takes time to turn that around. We've done some things to try to turn that. It's going to take time, for example, from our award ceremony, from our promotions, doing formal promotions. I try to give our officers the accolades that they deserve publicly and personally. I call them up to try to enforce, the carrot as much as we can and reinforce the good work. We have really open staff meetings, even with our command staff now, to try to address issues and get them involved and engaged. And a variety of other things that we've been doing, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take some growth on our side and on my part too, in terms of communicate maybe a little bit more openly, more often, what we're doing. But it's about growing together, and I feel we can get there by addressing it and being inclusive and inviting members of the department to partake in the process of changing and transition this department to the next level and developing plans, strategic plans.
We just need to wrap up, we can do some more activities offline.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that, as the chief noted, that there's be a committee of officers who will be involved in the implementation of the report, and, we hope, among other things, that leads to better outcomes, but also more buy-in, and that will certainly deal with, help address the morale issues that were noted in the report. So, all right, well, thanks, guys. Thanks for, Kim, thank you again for a terrific report, very useful report, and this is something that will guide our efforts in the years to come. Thanks, everybody.